My boss tried to cut my pay, so I cut his career short. When my paycheck came in lighter than usual, I didn't realize it was the start of my boss's downfall. I've never been the kind of guy who causes waves at work. If anything, I've always been the quiet, dependable one. The kind who fixes issues no one else understands, who stays late when others clock out, and who genuinely believes that hard work eventually speaks for itself. At least that's what I used to believe. My name's Ethan Miles, and I work, or used to work, as a project analyst at a large tech firm in Seattle. The company, Novices Technologies, had this reputation for innovation and transparency. They loved those buzzwords. They threw them around in every email, every company event, every HR memo. But inside the walls, it was a jungle with glass doors and fake smiles. And in that jungle was Greg Hollins, my direct manager, a man with the charm of a politician and the ethics of one too. I'd been working on a major internal project for about 6 months. The goal was to automate certain parts of our analytics pipeline, which would save the company millions in manual labor and software costs. The project was my baby. I designed the structure, handled the logic, debugged the nightmares that came at 3 a.m., and documented everything neatly. Greg's involvement, mostly walking around with a mug of coffee and saying things like, "Good work, champ," before taking screenshots of my progress for his weekly update deck to upper management. I didn't mind at first. I'm not a glory chaser. If the project succeeded, the department succeeded. That was enough for me. But then came that Friday, payday. I opened my banking app during lunch, mostly to check if I could afford to replace my dying laptop that week. But something looked off. The deposit was smaller than usual, not by a minor mistake, but by almost $800. I stared at the number, thinking maybe it was a processing error. Maybe HR made a mistake. It happens, right? I gave it a day, then another. By Monday, it still hadn't been corrected, so I emailed HR politely. "Hi, I noticed my recent paycheck seemed lower than expected. Could you confirm if there were any adjustments or deductions applied this cycle? Thank you." A few hours later, I got a reply. "Hi, Ethan. Due to recent budget restructuring, some roles across departments were subject to compensation realignment. Please reach out to your manager for specifics. HR team." Budget restructuring? Compensation realignment? What the hell did that even mean? So I walked into Greg's glass-walled office. He was on a call, laughing loudly, his feet up on the desk. Classic Greg. He waved me in with that "I'm too important, but I'll humor you" gesture. When he finally hung up, he leaned back and said, "Ethan, my man, what's up? You look like someone told you the vending machine's out of coffee." I told him about the reduced pay, calmly, professionally. He sighed dramatically, like I'd asked him to donate a kidney. "Oh yeah, about that," he said, pretending to look remorseful. "Upper management wanted some budget optimization, so I had to make a few adjustments in the team structure." "Adjustments?" I repeated. "You mean my pay?" He nodded like it was no big deal. "Yeah, look, it's not personal. Everyone's tightening belts right now. I actually took a cut myself." Later, I'd find out that was a blatant lie. I just stood there, trying to keep my composure. "Greg, my workload hasn't changed. I'm leading the automation project. You said it's the department's biggest priority." He gave a shrug that made me want to throw his overpriced coffee mug out the window. I know, but we've all got to do our part. Chin up, champ. When the project wraps and we present to the execs, I'll make sure you're taken care of." I walked out of his office feeling like I'd been slapped in slow motion. Taken care of. Right. For a week, I tried to let it go. I told myself maybe it was temporary. Maybe it was truly a company-wide adjustment, but something kept nagging at me. Greg had been unusually chipper lately, new watch, new suit, talking about networking dinners with executives. Then one Thursday evening, I stayed late finishing up some automation reports. Most of the office was empty, but I heard voices from the break room down the hall. One of them was Greg's unmistakable laugh. And then I heard this sentence: "Yeah, I trimmed some of the fat from my team's pay, make quarterly numbers look cleaner. You know how it is. Can't let the execs think the budget's bloated." I froze. Another voice, one of the senior analysts, chuckled and said, "You're savage, man. Didn't think you could actually cut salaries without corporate approval?" Greg laughed again. "They'll never check. I restructured the expense sheet to make it look like merit-based realignment. HR rubber stamped it. Besides, if they want to keep their jobs, they won't ask questions." I can't describe the feeling that hit me in that moment. Anger wasn't even the right word. It was betrayal mixed with humiliation. I'd given everything to this project weekends. Mental energy, sleep, and this guy just casually admitted to cutting my pay to make himself look like a budget hero. That was the exact moment I decided something. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to quit. I was going to make sure that one day, Greg Hollins would regret ever thinking he could steal from me. The next morning, I started documenting everything. Every project file, every email he sent, claiming credit for my work, every meeting summary where I presented ideas that later appeared in his reports. I created encrypted backups on a personal drive, timestamps, change logs, the works. I even started recording casual team calls where Greg would summarize updates to upper management, always with him as the architect of the project. It became a quiet obsession. And honestly, it was kind of satisfying, watching him dig his own grave one brag at a time. I also began paying closer attention to how Greg operated. He wasn't just manipulating me, he was playing everyone. There was Maya, one of the best UX designers I'd ever met. Greg constantly dismissed her suggestions in front of clients, then used them later in his improvements. There was Luis, our finance lead, who once caught Greg claiming budget savings that actually came from Luis manually fixing a reporting error. And there was Jenna, the intern Greg regularly used as his personal assistant coffee runs, errand lists, printing documents that had nothing to do with her internship goals. It was like watching a wolf in a business suit feeding off the work of others while pretending to be the team's savior. But I had one advantage, Greg didn't. Patience. He was addicted to quick wins, instant recognition, fast promotions, loud applause. I was the opposite. I could wait months if I needed to. Because I wasn't after applause, I wanted justice. So while Greg was busy playing office politics, I was quietly building my case. I rewrote sections of the automation code to include invisible markers, subtle metadata that embedded the creator system ID and timestamp. They weren't visible unless you knew where to look. It was like signing my name in invisible ink. Each update, each commit, each change had a fingerprint mine. And I made sure those fingerprints pointed right to me, not him. 2 weeks later, Greg called a team motivation huddle. His favorite thing, talking for an hour without saying anything useful. He announced that our project was in the final stretch and that he'd be presenting it to the executive board soon. He gave a big speech about teamwork, innovation, and sacrifice. Then, with the fakest sincerity ever, he looked at me and said, "Special shout out to Ethan here. Couldn't have done it without him. You're the real MVP, man." The room clapped. I forced a smile. Inside, though, I was done playing nice. That night, I went home, turned on my laptop, and backed up everything version. Histories, emails, chat logs, even meeting calendar invites showing who led what. I organized it all neatly, labeled, and timestamped. I wasn't sure how I'd use it yet, but I knew one thing. I was sitting on a goldmine of evidence. Weeks passed and the final demo date was set. Greg strutted around like he'd already won an award. He even bought a new car, a Tesla, and joked that it was his promotion gift to himself. That car would later become an ironic symbol of his downfall, but I'll get to that. At that point, I was a mix of calm and anticipation. Every fake smile he gave me just reminded me how satisfying it would be when the truth came out. The thing is, revenge doesn't start with rage, it starts with clarity, and I was crystal clear. A few days before the big presentation, Greg called me into his office again. He wanted me to finalize the project documentation and hand it over so he could package it professionally. Sure. I nodded, pretending to cooperate. I gave him a clean version minus a few crucial details. The real final version, with complete logic, updated diagrams, and traceable creator data, stayed safely on my encrypted drive. He thanked me, grinning like a fox, and said, "You'll get your recognition soon, Ethan." Recognition. He said it like it was a bone thrown to a dog. As I walked out, I remember thinking, "You're right, Greg. I will get recognition, just not the kind you're expecting." The last night before the presentation, I stayed in the office till midnight, checking the systems, verifying the code signatures. Everything was ready. But I wasn't just preparing for a project demo anymore. I was preparing for a reckoning. And as I shut down my computer that night, I caught my reflection in the monitor, tired eyes, a calm face, and a quiet resolve that hadn't been there before. I whispered to myself, "You took my pay, Greg, but I'm going to take your entire career." I didn't mean it as a metaphor. I meant it as a promise. If Greg wanted to steal credit, I'd just let him, because that was the only way to destroy him. Revenge, I realize, isn't about acting fast, it's about acting smart. After that pay cut and the late night conversation I overheard, I didn't explode, didn't storm into Greg's office, didn't send a furious email. I played dumb. That's how you win against guys like Greg. You let them think you're harmless until they hand you the knife themselves. So I did exactly what he expected. I kept working. Smiled in meetings, nodded at his fake, "Good job, champ," acted like the pay cut didn't bother me. Inside though, I was already building a digital chessboard, and Greg was walking right into checkmate. Every day I came in early and stayed late, tweaking the automation system. On the surface, everything looked like progress, clean dashboards, accurate reports, flawless integrations. Greg thought I was doing him a favor by polishing his big project. In reality, I was layering traps, invisible ones, digital signatures, version tracking markers, embedded watermarks in the code that recorded every modification and the user who made it. The beauty of it was, Greg loved to edit things last minute. He'd open the files, make a few surface level tweaks, and save over them. Normally, that would overwrite my authorship, but not this time. Every change he made would automatically log his username, timestamp, and an identifier I'd built into the metadata. If anyone ever audited the files, it'd show exactly who contributed what. And spoiler, 98% of the work came from me. While setting my traps, I also started talking to others. Turns out, Greg had a trail of broken trust all over the department. One afternoon, I found Maya, our UX designer, sitting alone in the lounge looking frustrated. She'd just finished a client call where Greg took over halfway and dismissed her design approach. When I asked what happened, she rolled her eyes. He told the client I was just still learning the ropes. Maya had 5 years more experience than him. We talked for an hour. She told me about the times he borrowed her wireframes and presented them as his own concepts. I told her about my pay cut. The more we talked, the clearer it became. Greg wasn't just greedy, he was a parasite. Next, There was Luis, the finance lead. Greg had publicly congratulated him for reducing departmental expenses, even though those savings came from Luis fixing Greg's budget errors. Luis laughed bitterly when I brought it up. He's like a human black hole. Everything good just disappears into him. And then there was Jenna, our intern. She was bright, hardworking, and way too polite for her own good. Greg had turned her into his errand girl, printing his reports, ordering his lunch, even booking his haircuts because he didn't trust the app. When I asked her how she was holding up, she just shrugged and said, "I'm lucky to have an internship here." That broke something in me. People like Greg thrive because decent people like Jenna think exploitation is normal. So I decided to make sure that when Greg fell, he'd take his mask with him. It wasn't hard to build quiet trust with the three of them. We didn't form some dramatic alliance, we just started talking, sharing stories, comparing notes. Maya had screenshots of Greg sending her designs to clients under his email signature. Luis had budget logs that showed how Greg doctored expense sheets. And I had all the digital receipts for the automation project. We didn't discuss revenge directly, but we didn't need to. Everyone just wanted fairness. I told them, just keep doing your work. Don't confront him. Let him think everything's fine. Because the moment Greg thought he'd won, that's when I'd pull the pin. The following week, Greg called another meeting. He strutted in wearing a new gray suit and one of those smirks that made you want to wipe it off his face. "Big news, team," he said, pacing in front of the whiteboard. "Corporate's reviewing candidates for the new Director of Innovation position next quarter." He paused for dramatic effect, like we were supposed to gasp. "I've been in talks with the VPs about presenting our automation project as a key innovation deliverable." I pretended to be impressed. "That's great, Greg." He smiled, probably thinking I was starstruck. "Yeah, if it goes well, it's going to put this whole department on the map." "Of course. I'll make sure the team gets recognition too." Recognition. That word again. The corporate equivalent of breadcrumbs. After the meeting, I went back to my desk, opened my private notes, and typed, "Target event confirmed, director pitch presentation, late April." That was my timeline, my finish line. From that day, I fed Greg everything he wanted. Progress updates, reports, prototype builds. I even made suggestions on how to present the work to execs, knowing he'd take them as his own. The trick with people like him is to never show your hand. He had to believe I was his loyal workhorse until the very last second. So I over-delivered, gave him my best ideas. Then, quietly, built backdoors. I coded a special admin script that, when activated, would reveal every hidden data tag, timestamps, version logs, author credentials, all of it in a clean visual dashboard. It was meant to be used for internal audits, but I repurposed it for something better. Let's just say, when the presentation day arrived, that script would be my magic show. Meanwhile, the office politics thickened. Greg was working overtime trying to impress upper management. He started hosting these ridiculous innovation huddles where he'd spout motivational nonsense like, "Let's push boundaries, guys. Remember, synergy breeds success." Every time he said synergy, I mentally docked 5 IQ points. He also began excluding certain people from meetings, mostly those who'd question him. Luis once told me, he doesn't invite me anymore because I asked for transparency in his budget sheets. Of course not. Transparency was Greg's kryptonite. Then came one of those moments that confirmed I was doing the right thing. It was a Thursday evening again, same as the night I overheard his pay cut brag, and Greg was in his office talking to one of the execs on speakerphone. I was packing up when I heard my name. "Yeah, Ethan's good, reliable, bit too technical for leadership though. Doesn't have the soft skills." I froze. He laughed. "I'm guiding him. Kid's got potential, just needs direction, my direction." My fist clenched so hard my knuckles popped. Kid? I was 32, 2 years older than Greg. That was it. I stopped feeling any guilt about what was coming. Outside of work, I started treating this like a side project of its own. My living room turned into a small war room. Sticky notes with timelines, USB backups, printouts of changelogs. I'd stay up late documenting every detail, making sure that when the time came, no one could question who really built the system. I also started recording voice memos after certain meetings, summarizing key conversations. Not illegal, just my own recollections for accuracy. It helped me stay sharp. I knew I was walking a fine line, but Greg had crossed it months ago. I was just drawing it back in permanent ink. Over the next few weeks, my allies began seeing shifts too. Maya's design suddenly started getting more praise because she began embedding her initials subtly into UI mockups. Greg didn't notice. When clients complimented her work directly, he had to grit his teeth and smile. Louis started forwarding budget updates directly to finance heads with CCs to the team, making sure Greg couldn't tamper with numbers anymore. And Jenna, she finally stopped fetching Greg's coffee. She said it with the most innocent smile. "Sorry, Greg. Ethan told me I should focus on my internship goals." Greg didn't like that. He gave me a strange look later that day, but by then, I didn't care what he suspected. I'd already set up enough insurance to bury him 3 times over. 2 weeks before the presentation, Greg called me into his office again. He wanted me to review the final deck he was preparing for the executive board. He spun his monitor toward me, showing slides that were practically plagiarized from my documentation. Every diagram, every flowchart, every phrasing, all mine. He just slapped his name on the title page. He said, "Ethan, you've been a big help, man. I'll make sure you get a shout out at the end." A shout out. I smiled and said, That means a lot, Greg. Inside, I was laughing, because I'd already inserted a small trigger script into his presentation file. If he ran the demo version of the software during his pitch, which he absolutely would, the system would automatically activate my audit display. To him, it'd look like a technical hiccup. To the execs, it looked like proof. That night, I stayed at my desk long after everyone left. I double-checked every log, every trigger, every safeguard. If anyone ever accused me of tampering, I'd have a perfect chain of evidence showing that everything Greg used came from his own folder. I'd simply built the truth into the software itself. I looked around the empty office, the glow of monitors reflecting off glass walls. It was eerie, like standing in the calm before a storm. But for the first time in months, I felt peaceful. Not angry, not bitter, just ready. Greg thought he'd taken advantage of a quiet, obedient employee. What he didn't know was that I'd been quietly engineering his undoing line by line, bite by bite. As I packed up that night, Jenna passed by my desk. She smiled shyly and said, "He's going down soon, isn't he?" I didn't confirm or deny, I just said, "Sometimes the best lessons teach themselves." She grinned and said, "Well, I hope he gets an A+ in karma." That made me laugh harder than I had in weeks. By the time I walked out into the chilly Seattle night, my plan was complete. All I had to do now was wait. Greg was about to get everything he'd ever wanted: the spotlight, the audience, the praise. And in front of that same audience, he'd also lose it all. He just didn't know it yet. Greg's big day was supposed to make him a director. Instead, it made him unemployed. The morning of the pitch felt strangely peaceful. I woke up before my alarm, brewed coffee, and stared out the window while the city slowly came alive. The sky was just turning gold, and the only sound was the hum of early traffic. It was ironic, after months of quiet planning, sleepless nights, and careful moves, the day Greg Hollins had been waiting for was the day I'd been preparing for. I wasn't nervous, not even a little. I'd already gone through every possible outcome: the lies, the denials, the excuses. I'd planned for every angle. Today wasn't about getting revenge anymore. It was about exposing the truth, cleanly and calmly. Greg thought he was walking into his coronation. I knew he was walking into his execution. At 8:45 a.m., I arrived at the office. The energy was electric, the kind that only happens when upper management is around. People were dressed sharper than usual. HR was buzzing. And Greg, he looked like a man who thought he was about to be named a king. He stood by the glass conference room, shaking hands with executives, laughing that fake laugh of his, the one where he crinkled his eyes, like he actually cared what people were saying. When he spotted me walking in, he smiled wide and called out, "Ethan, there's my secret weapon." I forced a grin. "Morning, Greg. Big day, huh?" "You bet. Couldn't have done it without your work," he said, lowering his voice and patting my shoulder. "Just remember, when I move up, you move up too, all right?" If he only knew how true that statement was. Not in the way he expected, but definitely true. The boardroom was a glass-walled shark tank on the top floor. A long oak table stretched across the room, surrounded by execs people whose suits probably cost more than my car. On the screens behind Greg was my project, Autumn 8, the automation dashboard I'd spent the last 9 months building, the one that could save the company millions by streamlining data flows, billing systems, and client analytics. Except Greg was about to take full credit for it. He'd even made a glossy presentation with slides full of buzzwords he didn't understand. Scalability, efficiency, cost optimization. Words that sounded smart enough to keep him out of real technical questioning, or so he thought. The CEO, a calm, sharp-eyed man named Harold Pierce, sat at the head of the table. "Greg," he said, "we're ready when you are." Greg smiled, clicked his remote, and began. For the first 10 minutes, I stood near the back of the room with Maya and Luis, the two people who had helped me quietly prepare for this day. Maya had her laptop open, watching the mirrored screen output in real time. Luis kept glancing between Greg and me, his jaw tight but excited. Greg started strong. I had to give him that. He had charisma. He knew how to sell an illusion. He spoke like a leader, confident, charming, and rehearsed. He walked the execs through the slides, highlighting the numbers I had calculated. He even quoted his team's dedication, which apparently he personally led with discipline and innovation. Maya whispered, "He's good." I smirked. "Yeah, he's rehearsed this a lot." Then I saw the final slide, the one titled Live Demonstration. That was my moment. My code was sleeping behind that slide waiting. Greg clicked the button and said, "Now, let me show you the live dashboard in action. It's fully operational and integrated with our internal systems." He connected to the live server, the same one I'd worked on until 2 a.m. last night. The dashboard appeared sleek, responsive, and branded with the company's logo. Applause from a few executives. Greg's chest puffed up. "Impressive work," Harold said. "You said your team built this?" Greg nodded. "Yes, I led the technical and conceptual development myself. My analysts contributed, of course, but I architected the framework." That was it. That was the lie I needed on record. At that moment, the automation dashboard flickered. The data visuals shifted, froze for a second, then resumed. Greg's smile faltered for just a moment. He turned toward the screen. Then, right in the top right corner, exactly where I placed it, a small text began typing itself into the live interface. "Developed by Ethan Miles, project lead, Department of Analytics." A few people murmured. Greg froze. Harold frowned. "What's that?" Greg's hand flew to his laptop. "Oh, must be a debug artifact. One of the junior analysts must have left a test signature in the code. Happened sometimes." He tried to switch slides. The dashboard resisted. A new window opened automatically on the display not part of the presentation. It was a directory list, files, documents, timestamps, all neatly organized, all pointing back to one author, Ethan Miles. And then the clincher and automatically playing screen recording. It showed the dashboard's development logs, git commits, code changes, build approvals, every major update tagged under my employee ID. The date stamps made it undeniable. Silence filled the room. Greg's face went pale. I stepped forward, calm and collected. "If I may, sir," I said to Harold, "that's a version control display I implemented as part of the project's transparency system. It automatically attributes contributions and edits." Harold looked from me to Greg. "Is that true?" Greg stammered. Yes, but I oversaw." Louise stepped forward. "With respect, sir, Greg's oversight mostly consisted of asking for status updates and taking credit for Ethan's work." A few chuckles from the back. Even HR tried to hide their smiles. Greg snapped, "That's not true. Ethan, tell them we worked on this together." I took a deep breath and projected my voice clearly. "We did work together, sir, but let's be accurate. I handled all the development, the integration, the testing, and the final deployment. Greg handled communication." A subtle ripple of amusement moved through the room. Harold's expression hardened. "Mr. Hollins, can you explain why the system is crediting Mr. Miles as project lead?" Greg was sweating now. It's a mistake. I can fix it." "Please don't," I said politely. "I'd like to demonstrate something." I walked to the laptop and opened a folder labeled budget_restructure_notes. Inside were copies of Greg's internal emails, the ones where he bragged about trimming fat to improve executive margins. Right next to it was a PDF, my pay adjustment notice with his signature. Gasps. Someone whispered, "He cut your salary?" I didn't say a word. I just looked at Harold. Harold's tone turned cold. "Greg, step outside now." Greg opened his mouth, but HR had already stood up. Two of them escorted him out quietly, while the rest of the room sat in stunned silence. After he left, Harold leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Miles," he said, "that was unexpected." I nodded. "I didn't intend to interrupt, sir, but after what happened, I thought it was important the credit and integrity of the project be clear." He studied me for a long moment, then smiled. Not a big smile, but one of quiet respect. "You handled that professionally. We'll conduct a full review, but it seems you've done excellent work." Maya and Luis exchanged a relieved glance. I finally exhaled. Months of quiet anger melted into something like peace. By lunchtime, the entire office knew. Greg had been escorted out of the building not with a box or security guards, but with HR flanking him, his face red and jaw tight. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked out, past the same people he used to belittle in meetings. The whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you hear what Ethan did? Apparently Greg stole his project." "No way, Ethan? The quiet guy from analytics?" It felt strange being the center of attention. I didn't want it, but I wasn't going to hide from it either. A few days later, HR scheduled a follow-up. They thanked me for the documentation and professionalism. Greg's budget manipulation had triggered an internal audit, and it turned out I wasn't the only one he'd underpaid. He'd been rerouting budget excess into executive performance pools, basically bribing his way into a promotion. It was over. Greg was terminated, effective immediately. No severance, no reference. I didn't celebrate. I just went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and pushed one last update to the automation project, a silent line of code that ensured every future project had immutable contribution tracking. No one would ever have to go through what I did again. A week later, Harold called me into his office. He gestured to the seat across from his desk. "Ethan, I've been reviewing the full audit. You saved us from what could have been a major corporate scandal." I stayed humble. "I just did my job, sir." He smiled faintly. "You did more than that. You kept your composure when others would have exploded. We could use that kind of integrity on the leadership side." My heart skipped. "Sir," he slid an envelope across the table. Inside an offer letter. "Senior project lead. Effective next quarter," Harold said. "We'll be announcing it soon." I was speechless. After everything Greg had done to keep me down, his downfall had literally opened the door for my rise. That night, as I walked out of the office, I saw Greg one last time. He was standing near the parking lot, in plain clothes, talking to someone on the phone. He looked smaller somehow, like a balloon that had lost its air. When he saw me, his jaw clenched. He hung up and walked over. "You happy now?" he spat. "You ruined me." I looked at him calmly. "You ruined yourself, Greg. I just let the truth do its job." He didn't have a comeback. He just shook his head, muttered something under his breath, and walked away into the night. On the elevator ride down, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. For the first time in months, I didn't look tired. I didn't look beaten down. I looked free. The office politics, the manipulations, the gaslighting, they were behind me now. I wasn't the quiet guy anymore. I was the man who'd stood up and won without ever raising his voice. And that's when I realized something important. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's just justice wearing a calm face. And Greg learned that the hard way. I didn't just end his career. I built mine from the ashes he left behind. It's funny how quiet an office feels after a storm. For weeks, our workplace had been a whirlwind of gossip, HR interviews, and whispered conversations around the coffee machine. But when the investigation wrapped up and Greg Holland's name was officially scrubbed from the company directory, the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. It felt like the air had finally cleared. No more forced smiles in meetings. No more fake compliments from a man who only cared about himself. No more walking on eggshells around someone who treated power like a weapon. Greg was gone. For good. And me? I was still there sitting at the same desk, drinking the same black coffee. But I wasn't the same person anymore. The internal investigation had confirmed everything I suspected and more. Greg's pay cut stunt was just the tip of the iceberg. Once HR and the finance auditors dug deeper, they found trails of expense fraud, favoritism, and quietly manipulated reports that stretched back years. He'd been using department budgets like a personal ATM, taking executive retreats that somehow always ended in Vegas, client lunches that looked suspiciously like dinners with investors' daughters, and claiming travel reimbursements for projects he didn't even attend. My documentation, the emails, the logs, the change history became the backbone of the company's full internal audit. When I handed everything over, I didn't gloat, I didn't smirk. I just said, this should give you a complete picture, and went back to work. But the next week, something changed. Harold Pierce, our CEO, the same man who'd watched Greg implode during that boardroom presentation, called me to his office again. He stood by the window, looking out over the skyline. You know, Ethan, he said, it's rare that someone shows integrity under pressure. Most people either lash out or crumble. You stayed calm. I smiled lightly. I didn't see the point in yelling. The truth was louder. He turned and chuckled. That it was. Then he gestured toward a folder on his desk. The board reviewed your performance and the results of your project. We're restructuring the automation division, and we'd like you to lead it. I blinked. Sir, you mean... Yes, he said, smiling. Greg's old position. Double the pay. You'll have full control of the team. Hiring, strategy, everything. You built this project from the ground up. You deserve to build the department it's becoming. I didn't know what to say. For a moment, I just stood there speechless. After months of being undervalued, undermined, and underpaid, I was finally being recognized for what I'd actually done. And not because I demanded it. Because I earned it. When I walked out of that office, my team was waiting. Maya had this huge grin on her face. Well, she asked, trying to read my expression. I exhaled, smiled, and said, let's just say I'll be buying lunch for a while. Luis laughed. So it's official then? You're our new boss? Guess so. Maya playfully raised an eyebrow. You sure you can handle that kind of power? You've seen what happens when it goes to someone's head. I grinned. That's exactly why I'll handle it differently. The following months were a blur not of chaos, but of rebuilding. The automation division officially launched as its own branch within the company, with me as the head. I made it clear from day one that this wasn't going to be Greg 2.0. We started fresh. The first meeting I held was simple. No slides, no buzzwords, no hierarchy. Just all of us sitting around a table, coffee mugs in hand. Look, I said, I know things were rough under Greg. People were pitted against each other. Credit was stolen. Voices were ignored. That ends today. I don't care if you're a senior analyst or an intern. If you have an idea, I want to hear it. Maya smiled. Luis nodded. Even Jenna, the intern Greg once humiliated, looked like she was holding back tears. We introduced open documentation systems, public project logs, and contribution trackers. No more shadow changes, no more Greg-style surprises. Every person's effort was visible, celebrated. And for the first time, people actually enjoyed coming to work. It wasn't all easy, though. Power comes with strange shadows. Some people still whispered that I took Greg down. Others called me the silent killer. But I didn't feed into that narrative. I wasn't proud of ending someone. I was proud of fixing something that was broken. In private, there were moments I wondered if I'd gone too far. If maybe I should have warned Greg before the presentation, given him a chance to come clean. But then I'd remember the paycheck, the manipulation, the way he humiliated Jenna, the way he cut Luis's project budget and blamed Maya for his own mistakes. Greg had chances. He just never took them. Then one morning, I got an email that made me pause. Subject: a favor from Greg Hollins. I stared at it for a good minute, half expecting it to be spam, but it was real. I clicked it open. Ethan, I heard about your promotion. Congratulations, you earned it. Look, I know we've had our differences and I know I made mistakes more than I'd like to admit, but I'm in a tough spot right now. No one's calling back. My reputation's shot. I just need someone to vouch for me at Orion Analytics. You know people there, right? If you could put in a word, maybe they'll give me a shot. Please, man, I'm just asking for a referral, not forgiveness. Greg. For a long moment, I didn't type anything. It was surreal. The same man who once called me replaceable was now asking me to help him get hired. Part of me, the part that remembered every long night and every unfair paycheck, wanted to delete the email and move on. But another part of me, the one that learned restraint, knew this was the final test. So I replied, Hey Greg, appreciate the message. I'm glad you're trying to move forward. But this company doesn't hire people who cut corners or paychecks. Good luck out there. Ethan. I didn't send it with anger. I didn't even reread it. Just hit send and close my laptop. And that was it. That was the moment I realized my revenge wasn't about destroying him anymore. It was about closure. Months passed and our department flourished. The automation system was rolled out company-wide, saved millions annually exactly as projected. We were recognized at the annual corporate gala. Harold even joked that I'd turned chaos into code. But what meant the most to me wasn't the bonus or the applause or even the title. It was watching Jenna present her own project at that same event confidently, proudly, without fear. It was hearing Maya say, "I actually trust management again." It was seeing Luis finally get credit for his financial models. Those moments reminded me why I fought so hard in the first place. Revenge wasn't the goal, justice was, and justice only meant something if it left things better than before. One evening, after everyone had left, I stayed back in the office. The city lights glowed beyond the glass walls, and the faint hum of computers filled the silence. I opened the original code for Autumn 8, the project that started everything. In the comments, right next to my name, I typed a new line. Lesson logged. Revenge doesn't need rage, just truth, patience, and timing. I hit save, leaned back in my chair, and smiled. Because that was the truth of it all. Greg taught me what leadership shouldn't look like. His downfall taught me what power without empathy becomes. And my own rise, quiet, steady, and earned, taught me that real revenge doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from standing taller. When people talk about office revenge, they usually picture dramatic takedowns, shouting matches, or epic walkouts. But mine wasn't like that. I didn't burn bridges. I built new roads out of the ashes Greg left behind. And every time I walk through those glass doors, leading a team that believes in honesty, I remind myself of one simple truth. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destroying someone's career, it's building a better one of your own. All right, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.